Today we're going to take a look at section 4.2 on our Middle Colonies. And you can see here on the map our Middle Colonies are primarily the colonies of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. We'll take a look today at all of what section 2 entails. Section 1, if you remember, was the New England colonies, and after the Middle Colonies we are headed to the Southern colonies and the backcountry. The Middle Colonies had a lot to offer in addition to just a climate of tolerance. Michael Guillaume de Crevecoeur was a visitor from France, and he praised the region's fair cities, substantial villages, extensive fields, decent houses, good roads, orchards, meadows, and bridges, where 100 years ago all was wild, woody, and uncultivated. The prosperity that Crevecoeur described was typical of Middle Colonies. Immigrants from all over Europe came to take advantage of this region's productive land. Their settlements soon crowded out Native Americans who had lived in the regions for thousands of years. And if you look on this map, it gives a reason as to why so many Europeans wanted to come here. We can see everything from cattle to fish, beaver pelts or furs, iron, pigs, sheep, timber, wheat, you name it, we could get it in this area. So a very important region for our early colonies. Among the immigrants who came to the Middle Colonies were Dutch and German farmers. They brought the advanced agricultural methods of their countries with them. Their skills, knowledge, and hard work would soon result in an abundance of food. The Middle Colonies also boasted a longer growing season than in New England, and they did have soil that was rich enough to grow cash crops, or crops that were raised to be sold for money. Their common cash crops at this time included fruits, vegetables, and most of all grain. The Middle Colonies produced so much grain that people began calling them the breadbasket colonies. After harvesting their crops of corn, wheat, rye, or other grains, farmers took them to a grist mill. There, millers, the people that did the milling, crushed the grain between heavy stones to produce flour or meal. Human or animal power fueled some of these mills, but water wheels built along the region's plentiful rivers powered most of them. The bread that colonists baked with these products was crucial to their diet. Colonists ate about a pound of grain in some form each day, which is nearly 3 times the amount that we as Americans eat today. Even though colonists ate a great deal of grain, they had plenty left over to send to the region's coastal markets for sale. The excellent harbors along the coast of the Middle Colonies were ideal sites for cities. New York City grew up at the mouth of the Hudson River, and Philadelphia was formed at the mouth of the Delaware River. The merchants who lived in these growing port cities exported cash crops, especially grain, and they imported manufactured goods. Because of its enormous trade, Philadelphia was actually the fastest growing city in the colonies. The city owed its expansion to a thriving trade in wheat and other cash crops, and by 1720, it was home to a dozen large shipyards where we would have ships that were either being built or repaired. And here you can see this is a drawing of Philadelphia around the early 1700s. Now, the wealth of the city also brought many improvements to the public. They started building large and very elegant buildings like Independence Hall, which graced the city streets. Streetlights also showed the way along paved roads. In 1748, there was a Swedish visitor named Peter Kalm that exclaimed that Philadelphia had grown up overnight, and he says, "And yet its natural advantages, trade, riches, and power, are by no means inferior to any, even of the most ancient towns in Europe." And that's from the book America at 1750. So basically what he's saying is this town's unrivaled to nobody. And here you can see that even though the streets are kind of narrow back then because it was just horse and buggy, they're very clean. They're 100% constructed out of either brick or, actually they are brick roads and brick sidewalks. And you can see the street lights along the sides of the roads here. So it's very clean, whereas most cities at the time, especially in the new American colonies, were dirt roads and they were very gross and disgusting. Now, New York at the same time could also thank trade for its rapid growth. This business port handled flour, bread, furs, and whale oil. At mid-century, an English naval officer admired the city's elegant brick houses, paved streets, and roomy warehouses. "Such is the city that very few in England can rival in its show," said Kalm. So these are 2 of the nicest cities anywhere in the world at this point. And a lot of that was because of the fact that these colonists were very hard workers and they had a lot of ingenuity. Many different immigrant groups arrived in the port cities of the Middle Colonies, and soon the region's population showed a remarkable diversity or variety in its people. One of the largest immigrant groups in the region after the English was the Germans. Many of the Germans arrived between 1710 and 1740, and most came as indentured servants, which were fleeing due to religious intolerance. They were very much known for their skillful farming, and these immigrants soon made a mark on the Middle Colonies. German communities, wrote one historian, could be identified by the huge barns, the sleek cattle, and the stout workhorses. Now, Germans also brought a strong tradition of craftsmanship to the Middle Colonies. For example, German gunsmiths first developed the long rifle. Other German artisans or craftspeople became ironworkers and makers of glass, furniture, and kitchenware. Germans also built Conestoga wagons to carry their produce to town. These wagons used wide wheels which were suitable for dirt roads, and the wagons' curved beds prevented spilling when climbing up and down hills. The wagons' canvas covers offered protection from rain, and the Conestoga wagons would later be important in settling the West. The Middle Colonies also became home to many people besides the Germans. We also had English, Dutch, Scots-Irish, some Africans, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, Swedish, and French. Because of the diversity in the Middle Colonies, different groups had to learn to accept or at least tolerate one another. While the English Puritans shaped life in the New England colonies, many different groups contributed to the culture of the Middle Colonies, mostly because of religious freedom. Because of the greater number of different groups, it was difficult for any single group to dominate the others. Thus, the region's diversity helped to create a climate of tolerance. Some of the region's religious groups also helped to promote this tolerance. The Middle Colonies' earliest settlers, the Dutch in New York and the Quakers in Pennsylvania, both practiced religious tolerance. That is, they honored the right of religious groups to follow their own beliefs without interfering with one another. Quakers also insisted on the equality of men and women, so as a result, Quaker women served as preachers, and female missionaries traveled the world spreading the Quaker message. Quakers were also the first to raise their voices against slavery. Quaker ideals influenced immigrants in the Middle Colonies and eventually the entire nation. The tolerant attitude of many settlers in the Middle Colonies did not prevent slavery in the region, however. In 1750, about 7% of the Middle Colonies' population was enslaved. As in New England, many people of African descent lived and worked in cities. New York City did have a larger number of people of African descent than any other city in the northern colonies. In New York City, enslaved persons worked as manual laborers, servants, drivers, and as assistants to artisans and craftspeople. Free African American men and women also made their way to the city where they worked as laborers, servants, or sailors. Tensions did exist between the races in New York City, sometimes which led to violence. In 1712, for example, about 24 rebellious slaves set fire to a building, and they then killed 9 whites and wounded several others who came to put out the fire. Armed colonists caught the suspects were punished horribly. Some punishments showed that whites would resort to force and violence to control slaves, and even so, the use of violence did very little to prevent the outbreak of other slave rebellions. So, very short section. That is it. If you are finished early and you want to really challenge yourself, you can go to the ebook on page 28 and look at the section objective questions. Those will really help you get a good handle on section 2.